Hello, and welcome to Beyond Biotech, the weekly podcast from Labiotech. I'm Dylan Kassane, and this is episode 177 for the podcast. Today, I'm sitting down with Martin Beck, Senior Vice President and Head of the Inflammation Business Unit at Boehringer Ingelheim. Martin grew up just down the road from the company's headquarters in Germany, joined as a scholarship student more than 20 years ago, and never really left. And you'll hear why he still loves it. We spend most of the episode on a disease that doesn't get nearly enough attention: idiopathic and progressive pulmonary fibrosis. These are rare, fatal, lung-scarring conditions that kill faster than many cancers, yet patients often shrug off the first symptoms as just aging. Martin walks us through why half the people on today's treatments stop taking them, how BI just brought the first new medicine in over a decade to the US market, and why an AI tool that spots microscopic changes on lung scans might finally help doctors diagnose and treat these patients years earlier. I hope you enjoy my conversation with Martin Beck. Martin, welcome to Beyond Biotech.
Thank you, Dylan. It's a true pleasure to be here. Thanks for the interest.
Now, Martin, just to kick things off, maybe you can introduce yourself to our listeners, because when I looked over your LinkedIn profile, it really looks to me like you started right at the bottom, and now you're a corporate senior vice president at Boehringer Ingelheim. Tell me, how did you get into pharma in the first place, and what's your career been like to this point?
That's actually always a fun story, right? Because I think nobody grows up to dreams of being a pharma executive. Like, I had also kind of looked to be a pilot or a soccer player or something like this, which is really cool. But no, it actually happened. Boehringer kind of recruited me a little bit out of high school almost. So in Germany, after finishing high school, and I also spent some time high school in the US as well. And then when it was up to the decision what I'm doing after kind of school, I obviously looked at a couple of things. I thought about, well, maybe a teacher, but then also kind of I wanted to work international because I've always traveled a bit. And then, one day my dad came up and said, look, there's this program at Boehringer. So I grew up close to Ingelheim, close to where Boehringer's headquarters is. And said, look, they have this interesting program. It's an integrated study program. They would pay for everything, for all your, postgraduate and postgraduate study. And I was like, really, okay, why not have a look at it? And so I went through the assessment center, and they actually, liked me apparently, and they gave me that opportunity to do this integrated study course. So they paid for all my university education, and in the midst of it, so in the semester breaks, I went to the company to do different projects and internships, and was able to see the company as a whole, like really from a scholarship student coming up. And then I stuck with the company, went through different roles, different countries, mostly on the commercial side and on the general management side. And, there was always new opportunities coming up, exciting opportunities. Working in Australia was part of it, studying in the US at UCSB, working in Eastern European countries, working for the home market in Germany, working internationally with many different markets. So it was exciting to kind of go through this and get different opportunities from the company as somebody that really, as you mentioned, grew with the company. And I mentioned to it more than half my life I now spent with the company, and it's still exciting. I still love the culture. I love the people. And now this job that I have is super exciting because I'm now at a point where I can really, help shape what we bring to patients and how we help patients that are in dire need of new breakthrough medications.
For people who are new to the company or haven't heard too much about it, can you give me just a sort of an overview of where you're focused, what the mission of the company is?
Absolutely. So we want to transform life for generations. We are a privately held company, one of the largest in the world in the pharma sector, with the headquarters in Germany, in Ingelheim, Germany, with a rich history of, I think we're now running up to over 140 years of existence. And our main focus lies in kind of cardio-renal metabolism, also oncology, pulmonology. Over 100 years, we're now also in pulmonology. We are also in mental health and other emerging areas, which are very exciting fields. And I'm heading up the the business unit or the therapeutic area, what we call of inflammation, which is in a broader sense, immunology, which includes research in pulmonology, rheumatology, gastroenterology, and dermatology.
You said you're working in inflammation, but you're also pretty much at an intersection between drug innovation, artificial intelligence. You're working there as well. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, because what we do always is we look at the field holistically. And I think that's always very important that you really look at from, unmet need and where the future kind of goes in terms of, standard of care, future standard of care, remaining unmet need, and what drug discovery can do. So we're trying to really evaluate, looking into the future of where, patients are still in need for breakthrough innovation. And then we discuss with our discovery colleagues on how that is possible, what is possible, where the science is going, where the biology is going, and then kind of taking that through to say, how do we realize and bring this innovation then potentially to as many patients that can benefit from it. And then we look at multiple things because a lot of times, there's issues with underdiagnosis or treatment comes in too late or, that we kind of have to develop that market a bit more for patients and physicians to benefit from the innovation that we bring. Maybe they don't know what they have. Maybe they don't know the options that exist. Maybe they don't know the benefit from treating earlier or treating or diagnosing earlier. And those are things when we try to bring innovation to patients and to people around the world. What can we do to accompany this innovation to make sure it reaches as many people as possible?
One of the areas where BI is working and where we wanted to really talk about today is the issue of pulmonary fibrosis.
Yes.
In particular, idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis. This is what's out there. It's called the silent killer. It's pretty under-recognized. Maybe we can start by just painting a picture of the disease's impact on patients. What does it look like? What does it do?
Absolutely. And this is one of our core areas as in inflammation and where we have been, researching and working over 15 years in this rare and fatal condition, which is really kind of characterized by a progressive scarring of the lungs, right? That causes then irreversible decline of lung function. So you have to think about it as, you will have more trouble breathing. Every breath will become more difficult. And then, in the worst case, at the end, you kind of almost suffocate to a certain extent because your lung tissue is scarring more and more and more, and it becomes so much more difficult to breathe. And it's a disease that is, has an extremely high mortality rate, actually higher than many forms of common cancer, like breast cancer and others. So almost half the patients die within 5 years after diagnosis. And that's a huge unmet need that still exists because also sometimes those symptoms that exist are not as bad, what you would say, right? It's not like you're in dire pain or anything. It's more like a dry cough, shortness of breath, fatigues. Some people just really brush this off as, I'm just getting older. I should do more sports. I'm just, it's a lot of stress. I'm tired. And that condition is really underdiagnosed due to some of those issues. Or maybe it's misdiagnosed as kind of asthma, COPD, heart failure sometimes as well. And therefore, the diagnosis is really delayed by about 1 to 2 years. And we see an amount of 40 to 50 people that actually remain untreated. And this is something in order to address as well, because when we look at epidemiology, about 9.2 million people worldwide could be affected by IPF and PPF, and we can come later on what the differences between the two are. But this is something where also that urgency to treat is not always there in that disease, where kind of, oh, let's wait on what happens. Is it really progressing? Is it not? And I always compare it to cancer, right? If you're diagnosed with cancer, you don't say, oh, let's wait for the tumor to grow a little bit more, right? Until we treat. You say you go in, cut it out, diagnose whatever you want to do. But here there's still a lot of, it might not be as bad. It might not progress. It might not this. The current treatments have kind of tough side effects and I don't know. And then the patient and the physicians kind of convince themselves, maybe we wait a little bit more and see what it is. And that is something that we really want to address and kind of push forward. So to make sure that this very deadly condition is diagnosed early and treated early.
You mentioned those current treatments and some of those side effects. What are the treatments and what are the side effects that patients are feeling?
So currently we have two available treatments, two antifibrotic treatments that are available, nintedanib and pirfenidone, and they have multiple issues concerning different side effects, gastrointestinal side effects, photosensitivity, other issues that are across the board. And we see about 50 to 60% of patients discontinue treatment after 6 months. And that is something where, of course, if you don't take your treatment, it doesn't work. And where it has been 10 years, over a decade, of no innovation in that space. So those two medications exist since over 10 years for those different indications. And also one of them is only indicated for IPF only. The other one is for IPF and PPF. It's a bit of difference in the disease. And so there's for the bigger portion, which is the progressive pulmonary fibrosis, there's actually only one treatment available. And there's really a high need for additional innovation. I mean, the two are similar but different. So idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis is what the word says, idiopathic. So we don't know the cause of it. We don't know where it comes from. It's there. And progressive pulmonary fibrosis usually has a cause, an underlying disease like scleroderma or rheumatoid arthritis that then affects the lung at a certain point. And so that's from the causal piece a bit different between IPF and PPF. But I think it's important to make sure that we have treatments that can help both of them, because it's not always that clear cut either on which one is which as well, to a certain extent.
BI has been working on pulmonary fibrosis for some time now. There was OFEV. It was a great investment there. But what other sort of strategic investments have you made in this inflammation therapeutic area to start addressing some of these needs?
Yeah, we've been researching and working in the space across all the different areas, as I mentioned before, with pulmonology, gastro, derm, and rheumatology. So especially with OFEV, as you addressed, we went into the IPF space, into the PPF space as well. What we did in the last 10 years as well, we've researched multiple compounds. It's been a bit of a graveyard of innovation, that space. I think over 37 trials and compounds have failed in the last 10 years before we now are able to bring some of the innovation. And, this is something that we've been trying to push forward. We are on the forefront of that research to try also to understand the disease a lot better, to understand the drivers of the disease, to understand the patient needs, to understand how patients go, to understand how, a patient flows through the system and how we can help those patients being diagnosed earlier, being treated earlier, because that's a key success factor to, altering outcomes for those patients.
Maybe if I drag you back to the business side, you've got a whole area at BI which is working on inflammatory conditions, but then you've got this sort of really pointed area of IPF and PPF. Is there any capacity there for collaboration across different departments or across different specialists within the labs there? Does that help you move forward?
Absolutely. And this is one of the key things that we are pushing forward as well. I think this cross collaboration across different areas. And I think especially also on the early stage of the research and development, there's with our CRM colleagues, so cardiorenal metabolism, we're working together because, there's fibrosis in, the kidney, there's fibrosis in the liver. There are different things that play a role. Also on the oncology side, I mentioned that from a disease perspective on how the mortality of the disease is characterized, on how, people address it, how the unmet need is. We're working with all of our colleagues together, but especially around the oncology side, but also the CRM side, to kind of uncover what could be, target areas for those diseases, what could be innovation that we put together. And there's a lot of good cross collaboration. And we at Boehringer truly believe in that cross fertilization, not only across different functions like the commercial functions, the medicine functions, regulatory, etc., patient safety, all those type of functions, but also across different disease areas, because at the end, we're talking about treating a human, a patient, a person, and how we get to our success needs to be evaluated with every resource that we have. And I think that's important. And also, we'll get to that later, also in areas of IT and diagnosis measures, devices, all those type of things where we really want to make sure we use all the available resources at Boehringer to push ourselves, to push the area forward, which is really important.
Yeah, I want to dive into that a little bit because it's more than just people working in a lab or working on a new therapy. There's all these other things next to it. Let me start with one of these collaborations, which is the partnership with Brainomix,
Yes.
which you announced it last year. They have something that they call the eLung AI imaging software. Can you explain what that is and how it actually helps in diagnosis?
Exactly. No, and we're super excited about that collaboration. And it's part of what we addressed, what we talked about before. How do we push the area forward? How do we talk about, getting an earlier diagnosis, getting earlier treatment in? And, when treatment is delayed or stopped, lung damage can really progress faster, really then leading to the worsenings of the symptoms, reducing quality of life. And there's the true need to diagnose earlier. So that's what we set out to do. And at the end, how is pulmonary fibrosis diagnosed? Usually it's diagnosed, okay, you have the symptoms, you go into a clinic, there's the, they think it might be pulmonary fibrosis, and then you get a CT scan, an HRCT, so high resolution CT scan. And you get a snapshot of it. And then usually in order to define whether it's a progressive nature, you need a second scan a little bit later to say, okay, has anything changed, or is it somehow a stable condition? How big is the scarring of the lung? And that's done in the radiology departments. I'm basically looking at the two images and say, has it gotten worse, or is it stable, or how much is it? And that obviously relies on the human eye in a lot of cases. And, we've been discussing with different teams on what can we do in order to improve that. It's a very, antiquated model almost to kind of compare those two and look at it. So what we set out is how can we support the physicians, the radiologists, to make diagnosis simpler, to kind of highlight changes in the lung tissue that we have. So the partnership with Brainomix is an example of that commitment to kind of push the diagnosis earlier. So Brainomix, this AI imaging software, eLung, is approved in the US, all right, to quantify kind of computer, so CT biomarkers in patients with interstitial lung diseases, right? So we look at analyzing those medical images much more accurately and faster than humans ever can, and therefore have the diagnosis. So they basically overlay the two images, have an AI algorithm go over it and highlight for the radiologist the changes that they see on those CT scans, and therefore be able to assess much more accurately minor changes in lung tissue, in the scarring of the lung, and make an appropriate diagnosis, and then get an earlier treatment on the way.
So it's approved in the US. I guess that means there's data there, but there was some data that came out a couple of months ago now in May.
Yeah.
How successful is it? Is it better than a human eye?
Yes. So what we have seen, so we presented data at ATS in May. We also had a follow-up presentation at the ERS now in September as well. And it's very encouraging data. So we really see that it's possible to identify those microscopic changes earlier in the disease. So that's a major step forward. And we're trying also now to get more and more pilots along the way to find out more and more the applicability in the real world setting and how we get that into the clinics to make sure that it becomes part of the treatment algorithm and the diagnosis algorithm of different clinics, and then kind of broaden it out and work together with Brainomix to make sure that we can bring it to as many clinics as possible in order to push this forward. But it's still a bit in a piloting phase. We're still looking more into the research aspect of it and how to verify some of the data, because of course we have to be sure that really, really works. And we are on a very good way. We have the data. We are expanding our clinical research around it to make sure that physicians and providers feel comfortable with using the software and making it part of their patient journey, their algorithm of diagnosis.
I guess that's the other side of the coin, because on one side you've got the verification, let's just make sure that it works, it's validated, that's great. But on the other side, you've got to actually have people adopt it
Yes.
in their labs, and you've got to be broad enough that everybody has access to it.
Yeah.
How do you actually overcome those sort of challenges as opposed to just getting the software right?
Yeah, and that's usually one of the biggest challenges to look at. So we're trying to partner with health systems, starting with the US to, get the software into their system to show them, to demonstrate the benefits that it brings, and therefore create excitement around it, and then, kind of bring it to more and more. So create case studies, create kind of data to show, how it can be applied and how it kind of helps you to diagnose earlier, to treat earlier, and what that end benefit for the patient actually is. And, we have early success in that. We see that in those studies that we presented at the congresses, we see the results, we see the interest of those health systems to adopt it. And we just have to partner. And that's what you alluded to as well. It's a part of collaboration, partnership, to make sure there's the benefit for the patient is seen. And at the end, everybody wants to help that patient and wants to help patients be diagnosed early. It's the same for us, for Brainomics, for the health systems, for the physicians to be into it. And there is about, demonstrating the benefit and bringing it, then making it easy for them to adopt from a technology perspective and push it forward. So that's the piece that we're now working on, and we're creating those kind of use cases to make sure we can broaden it out.
You've got that AI tool on the one hand, but back inside the clinic, you've got another asset. And am I saying this right? Nerandomilast?
Nerandomilast, yeah, exactly. Yeah. Nerandomilast.
Tell me a little bit about this one. I mean, walk me through. What's the mechanism of action? What makes it different to other therapies that are already out there that you mentioned?
Absolutely. So nerandomilast, or Jascade, as we have it now as a brand name, launched in the US for IPF, is the first and only preferential inhibitor of phosphodiesterase. So we call PDE4B. So it's a preferential PDE4B inhibitor, which is approved for IPF in the US right now. It's really targeting that B enzyme of the PDE4 family, which addresses both inflammation or inflammatory parts and fibrosis elements. So, which really sets us apart from what is currently existing in the space of the antifibrotic. So we're not an antifibrotic, we're a preferential PDE4B inhibitor because we're targeting multiple systemic elements of the immune system to make sure that we can tackle that disease from different elements. And what we've seen is that it really has improved tolerability, therefore. It helps with early initiation and sustained treatment adherence, which has been, as we talked about, one of the key unmet needs in pulmonary fibrosis management. And the pooled analysis of Fibroneer, which we have presented now at the ERS as well, showed a nominally significant reduction in the risk of death of 59% in patients who received the starting dose, 18 milligram nerandomilast, without background treatment. So that's something that hasn't been there before, and it's the first time that could be seen, that nominally significant mortality benefit in a PF study. So that's something that excites us very much. And, as we always have it, death is the hardest endpoint. So even though we didn't meet the combined key secondary endpoint, which was not met, but the hardest endpoint, the best to measure and the clearest, is numerically significant in that part, and really excites us a lot, which is, nominally significant, not numerically, which excites us a lot and is a true, breakthrough for patients living with pulmonary fibrosis, where death at the end is the ultimate thing we have to prevent.
You mentioned the idea of sustaining the treatment, because earlier on you said one of the problems was people just drop the treatment, they drop out there. This asset is actually an oral treatment. You take it a couple of times a day.
Yeah. It's an
How
oral
has that
treatment
helped?
twice a day.
And has
Yeah,
that
so it's
kept
an
people
oral.
in there using it?
Yeah, so it's an oral treatment, twice a day, easy to use. You take it in the morning, you take it in the evening, roughly kind of 12 hours apart. And so that makes it extremely easy to use. And this is something where, from a convenience perspective, it's really good. With the fewer side effects, patients can be less concerned about starting and staying on the treatment for longer, offering that improvement. Um, and so that's a true step forward, the simplicity, the tolerability. And we've seen in the clinical trials, and if we compare it to others, the rate of discontinuation in the trial was very, very low. And that's something where, a clinical trial is always a bit more in artificial vacuum, but also from what we heard from investigators and how they kind of see the drug work and now, moving it over to actual prescriptions, there's a true advancement of that field, and physicians are very excited about having something after more than a decade of no innovation in their hands that has this kind of profile where we see something on the efficacy side that we haven't seen before, that survival benefit that we talked about, but also a truly differentiated tolerability profile that has been so burdensome for physicians and for patients for the last 10 years.
Is the idea that you can start to put these tools together so you have an earlier diagnosis or a better diagnosis with the AI tool, and then you come in with a more tolerable oral treatment that people can take? Is the idea to put all that together and make the patient intervention earlier and more effective?
Yeah, and that's what we are looking for as well. But again, that's a bit independent also on kind of what treatments we have. At the end of the day, we want to make sure that in the space, no matter what the treatment at the end of the day is, I think everybody benefits from being diagnosed early and treated early. And of course, we offer different opportunities for patients to be treated. But we always look at the field. How can we advance the field? How we can advance that space? How can we help patients? And I think the whole notion, and we also did that before we had nerandomilast, right? We also, try to help patients be diagnosed early. We try to help patients to be treated early, and regardless of what you have in your portfolio, because we want to make sure that patients know what they have early enough, so they can discuss with their physician what the appropriate course of treatment is, their certainty. And then we want to make sure that we drive our innovation, our research, our portfolio to help those patients as best as possible. And I think that's important because we want to look at that patient holistically and how can we help them in the different stages that they're in their, journey and their disease course.
One of the things that had us interested in talking to you today was some of the data that you put out recently at the ERS Congress. Tell me, what were the highlights there? Was there anything that was surprising or anything that you were particularly proud of?
Absolutely. And what we were able to do at the ERS was kind of dive deeper into the data. So at ATS, it was very top line on the overall perspective. But we've done one of the largest clinical trial or the largest clinical trial program in that area with the Fibroneer trials. Over 2,000 patients combined, and being able now at ERS to really show how does a patient benefit when they are newly diagnosed, when they don't have any treatment available because they don't tolerate the treatment, which is the 59% survival benefit or mortality reduction that you see. But also to show that even on top of the current treatment, on top of OFF, for example, there's still an about 40% risk reduction that we talk about from a mortality perspective. And being able to pool some of the studies to be able to show what IPF, PPF means. We were able, in the course of this year, also at the rheumatology congresses, to talk about how do patients benefit that have an autoimmune condition like RA ILD or SSC ILD. How do they fare with the disease? Because at the end of the day, it's really important to give physicians all the information they need to treat an individual patient. There's no such thing as an overall population patient, right? There's a patient that, is not treated right now. There's a patient that's treated with one medication or another medication with a certain condition. And that really excited us when we were able to present this data at the ERS to make sure we have everything available for physicians and for regulatory authorities to make the right decisions and have everything available, which is exciting to be done in holistically. And then on top, the poster that we had on the eLung platform as well to continue to drive the field forward, not only from a therapeutic perspective, but also from a diagnostic perspective.
Now, the really big news came, I guess, last month. FDA came through with the approval for the drug, which is fantastic. You said it's the first IPF treatment in over a decade now. Tell me how does a team at a pharma company react when something goes through? Is it relief? Is it excitement? Is it some sort of combination?
I think it's a combination of both because I mean, people can't really imagine how that process works and how difficult it is and the amount of data that you have to combine. I think the other day I saw something where it was, I think, 1 million pages or something that we sent across with data and with data points and analysis and different cuts. So there's definitely a bit of relief. There's excitement because there's so much work that leads up to it, but then the real work actually starts as well. You need to make sure the product is available, all the production is on point, the supply chain works, because you want to make sure that after approval you also can supply it as quickly as possible to patients as well. So definitely relief, definitely excitement, and more work to be done as well, which is fantastic to see it come through after so much time where patients were waiting.
What's the timeline then for availability in the US?
So as you alluded to, we received the FDA approval for IPF, so that first indication that we're going for in October, and the product is already available to patients in the US. We have filed for PPF, which is the progressive pulmonary fibrosis, in the US and China already. We also have the IPF approval in China. I think you also saw that probably. We put out a press release as well. And we have filed IPF and PPF combined in the EU and Japan as well.
Yeah, I saw the China one come across our desk there. Tell me about this strategy of going global then. How do you get things out to where they need to be? Are there teams working in different countries? Do you try and centralize everything? How does it work?
Yeah. So what we do, we form our company position on the data, on the dosing, on what we see on the trial, and we submit this to regulatory authorities, usually in a bit of a staggered approach because you can't do everything at once, and you start with usually the most mature and quickest regulatory authorities in the world, and then you kind of go down the line as well, and usually China, US, Japan, EU, those are the ones that also other regulatory authorities across the world kind of look at a little bit. And therefore, we kind of move that then down the line and make sure we get everything done as quickly as possible for the different countries, but also realizing you can't do everything at once because there are, questions coming from the regulatory authorities. And, there's this group of people that is doing this as a specialized group of people. And we want to make sure that they have the time to engage appropriately, answer the questions, make sure all the quality is there, all the data is available, all the analysis available, and therefore we take it usually step by step to make sure we have enough capacity to answer all the questions and engage with those authorities.
So your FDA here in Europe, Japan, China. There's also a big sort of underserved region outside of that in Africa, in South America as well, in parts of Asia. How are you actually going to ensure that you get the drug to patients there as well? Is there a plan for some sort of equity access?
Yeah. And this is something at Boehringer Ingelheim, kind of this access to breakthrough therapies and healthcare solution is at the core of our business and values. And we have a pillar called More Health, which is an initiative to drive access to healthcare, across the different regions. And this is something to realizing that healthier future for all is a key to our sustainable development for generation. That's a big push that we do. So with this initiative, we aim to improve kind of the health outcomes for those vulnerable communities that you alluded to, starting with the availability, but increasing access to those safe and quality and effective option to prevention and care for those patients. But we have to take a staggered approach on this because we have, like I mentioned before, we engage with the different authorities. We have to make sure that things are coming to the market. There's where the maturity of some of those regulatory authorities are the highest. And then we make sure that we further drive this and as much as possible make the product available across the world.
Let's look a little bit forward now. You've got this new drug on the market. You've got your AI partnership with Brenomics. Is this bringing a new era of precision medicine when it comes to PF?
And this is something that we're keen on looking at. I think right now the unmet need is very high, and this is where we hope that Jascade nerandomilast will be a new foundational treatment for many patients in this area. And then obviously we don't stop there, right? And I think the development in this space will continue to look at combination treatments. We'll continue to look at precision medicine, so which patients might react better to one or the other treatment. I think the field will evolve, and we want to be at the forefront of that. So we look at biomarkers, we look at combinations, we look at the natural history of the disease. We look at different diseases, underlying diseases, comorbidities, to make sure that we bring the best medication to the patients that benefit the most from it.
And I know it must be a strange question to get just when you've got something right to market, but what comes next? What's the next technology? What's the new emerging approach that's going to continue to transform things? And how does Boehringer see themselves fitting in there?
Yeah, as one of the leaders in pulmonary fibrosis, we want to continue to be at that forefront. And just because we just had a success, it doesn't stop, because you need to make sure that you have your research going, you have your early development, you have your clinical development ongoing. So we have, a pipeline, a portfolio in that space that we want to continue to mature and advance. We have one in phase 2, a compound right now that we're trying to advance as well, that we will get read out in the next year. So this is something that we want to continue to push. And I think the whole AI technology and how that can be done in diagnosis, but also helps us in drug discovery, and how can we be faster with our drug development in that area is something that excites the team a lot. And we're looking at the different areas to make sure that we are at that forefront. We are at that next wave of innovation, and how can we enable earlier diagnosis, more precise diagnosis? How can we characterize patients better? How can we maybe prevent some of the things that are happening as well? So there's a lot of interesting ideas. There's a lot of interesting development, interesting science that we want to push forward to make sure that we don't stop here, because even with that fantastic breakthrough innovation, there will be remaining unmet need, and we can't rest until we've really helped those patients live a normal life, live as long as they can with that condition. So that's where our passion lies, and where we want to try to advance the field.
That's a really optimistic note to finish off on. Martin, thanks for joining us today on Beyond Biotech.
Thank you so much, Dylan. It has been a true pleasure. Thanks for your interest. Thanks to you guys, and all the best to you.
That's it for this episode. Don't forget to check out all the latest news and analysis at Labiotech.eu. I hope wherever you are in the world, you have a great week ahead. Thanks for listening, and I hope you'll join us again next time for another Beyond Biotech.